the time I want to call upon a young psychologist who is a faculty in Indraprasth College of Women, Delhi University. She is Pavani Tyagi and she specializes in counseling. And she is coming at a right time after we discussed about the problem. She is going to discuss about the answer to students. Pavani, most welcome.
Thank you so much, Amrish sir, for having me. And I want to congratulate Mansik Shakti Foundation for talking about a topic that is so important, sensitive, and relevant in current times. Uh, I just want to share my screen. Just a second. Is my screen visible? So, yeah. Good evening, everybody present here. Thank you for all being here for a session that is both timely and deeply important. The previous speaker, Professor Meena, has spoken so beautifully about the relevance, how various factors play a very important role, the kind of mindset that we have in colleges and schools today. So this topic becomes extremely relevant in current times. I will personally be discussing counseling strategies for suicide prevention using a very strong psychosocial lens. My aim would be to develop some clarity, sensitivity, and practical understanding on how we can support individuals, especially students, who may be struggling with emotional distress or suicidal thoughts. We begin with the topic that deserves our attention, and I would like to focus why do we need to talk about this. Across universities and colleges, I've spent a decade in the Delhi University ecosystem. We are witnessing rising concerns around student mental health, and research claims that it is going to be the next mental health problems are going to be the next pandemic. So many students are juggling with academic pressures, competition, loneliness, relationship issues, uncertainty about future, and identity related stress. So, suicide is now considered both a public health and a psychosocial issue, meaning that it emerges from the interaction that, personal vulnerabilities and environmental pressures, which is why early identification and supportive counseling are essential. Many crises can be prevented when signs are noticed early, when someone reaches out, and when students feel seen and supported. Finally, prevention is a shared responsibility. There is no one stakeholder that can take the complete responsibility of it. So, peers, educators, counselors, and institutions, everybody plays a very important role in building a campus environment where students feel safe to seek help. Now, let's understand suicide. What is the overview of it? So when we talk of about suicide, it is important to start by addressing some of the myths that exist right now. A very common myth, when I also interact with students, they don't like talking about it, and I feel that when we keep something under the hush hush, it only propagates. So a very common myth is that talking about suicide plants ideas in somebody's mind, but research clearly shows the opposite. You know, when we talk about it openly and non-judgmentally, people feel relieved, understood, and less lonely. So suicide is not an impulsive choice, but it is a multi-determined behavior shaped by many interacting factors, which can be biological, psychological, and social. So, as counselors or educators, our job is not to judge or to assume, but to understand. This clarity helps us approach individuals with compassion instead of shock or criticism. A lot of times, when in schools and colleges, students hesitate to reach out to their faculties or other people involved in the system because they feel that this will not be heard or they will not feel seen, and it might have some judgments related to what kind of people they are. So if we are non-judgmental, that opens the gateway to communication. Now, there are certain neurological and psychological underpinnings to this entire concept of suicide. So, biologically, we see factors like serotonin dysregulation and changes to the stress response system. These influence mood, emotions, and impulse control. Psychologically, two things repeatedly emerge, that are hopelessness, that there is nothing left in this world for me to look up to, or nothing can change my current scenario, or nothing will ever improve in life. And second is cognitive constriction. Thinking becomes very, very narrow, shallow, rigid, and stuck. So a person creates their own mental frameworks where they feel that this reality that they're living today is the ultimate reality and nothing is going to change thereafter. So then we have the interpersonal psychological theory, which says that suicidal behavior develops when a person feels that they don't belong, believes that they're a burden, and over time develops the capability to harm themselves. So suicide is not something that happens in an instant. There's a lot that has happened before that. Okay. And so when we say that suicidal behavior is developing, there are factors that are leading to that development. So these are some of the facts that lie in the neurobiological or psychological underpinnings. Now let's understand some of the psychosocial. So by psychosocial, I mean psychological and social risk factors. So risk factors are anything that contribute to a student's distress or an individual's distress, and they also create pathways that will have them higher chances of falling into the trap where these kind of thoughts take over their mind. So, some of the risk factors include mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder, academic pressure, and performance demands. So, sir was recently, just now mentioning how quota. So, some research papers also say that it is the suicide capital of India, and the academic pressure, and a lot of parents put in all their financial resources into sending their kids to the to quota for studying, and academic pressure is one of the most important factor when when it comes to students distress, relationship conflicts, or breakup distress. So this is also a time when youngsters engage in relationships, and a lot of them can be at the receiving end of it. Social isolation or lack of belonging. A lot of times, students, when they move out of their hometowns, when they go abroad for studying, or when they go to newer places, they also might feel that this sense of belongingness is missing, and they might feel very lonely. There's nobody to talk to, also, a lot of times. Family conflict or financial stressors can also be a big contributory factor. Identity related stress, such as gender, sexuality, caste, minority, all of these factors become the risk factors, and they create more possibilities for a student specifically to have distress or heightened stress. And then of course there's a lot of, so now there the government initiatives, and there are a lot of barriers in access to triggering or suicidal content online, but there are still a lot of websites that which are lacking monitoring, and there is excess exposure to it also. Dark web is specifically popular for this. So these factors often accumulate. For example, somebody might be facing academic pressure, conflict at home, and a breakup all at the same time. So now this person's, predisposition for some distress, psychological distress, or mental health issues becomes more, and this person is very, very vulnerable right now. Understanding these layers helps us avoid oversimplified explanation and instead look at the full picture of a student's life. So what's very crucial here is to understand that all of these are not happening linearly. So these are things happening interdependently, and a student is exposed to most of these at the same time. Now, having spoken about risk factors, I want to come to protective factors. What can help a student sail through when the students are facing some challenges or issues related to their well-being or mental health? So, some of the things that are very, very important, and research has time and again shown us how they can be beneficial, is social connectedness. We are gradually moving to more Western concepts of individualistic culture, but research has time and again shown that how collectivism and standing together in times of distress really, really helps a person sail through. Supportive family, peer, and faculty relationships. So when we were talking in the previous session how it is important to create an overall ecosystem which is where there is the support speaks through, where the child does not feel that why am I going to approach, who am I going to approach, or should I approach. These things have to be taken off from the system itself. Then emotional regulation and problem solving skills. So I think a good thing that I see in schools happening these days is the life skill training that they are investing in. So emotional regulation, we've for a very long time only spoken about academic excellence and creating a life and competition and stuff, but we've forgotten that young kids, and it has to start really young in life, where we are talking about emotional regulation, how to manage one's own emotions in times of distress, how to take care of ourselves when it comes to mental health. So we all have a vocabulary for physical dysfunctioning, but we have very restricted or very close to very minor vocabulary for emotional states of a person. And then access to counseling and support systems. So students specifically feel that there are financial barriers to counseling, and there is a lot of stigma associated. So I remember somebody was mentioning in the previous Q&A session that my parents might feel that I am depressed or I am anxious, and how these terms, although they are so real, but then they also carry a lot of stigma associated with them. So a lot of celebrities are talking about it, people who have made it big are talking about it, that depression happens, anxiety happens, and a person may be fully functional while all of this is happening. So it's also important for us to understand that how removing stigma is very, very important in all of this. And then a sense of purpose. What is my ultimate purpose in my life? Students often feel that if they have failed in examination, or if they've not catered to the expectations of the institution of or of the parents, they feel that they are a failure. But that's not the case. There's a wide horizon of opportunities beyond that. But if there is a sense of purpose, cultural grounding, and value system intact, then these are big, big protective factors for anybody. How do we recognize some of the warning signs in students, and what we'll also be discussing what to do in those scenarios. So first and foremost is that peers know that how my friend behaves. A parent knows what my child is in a usual circumstance. But if we notice, so these are some of the early warning signs in students: drastic mood changes, fluctuations in moods, withdrawal from friends or routine, expressing hopelessness or feeling trapped, a very, very routine based life, cyclic in nature, giving away belongings, so giving up on friends, not going outside, withdrawing from social circle, declining academic engagement. So a lot of times the previous speaker was also mentioning that how an excellent child at academics, but if the mental health is not being taken care of, then the academic performance is also going to see a decline in it gradually, and the student is going to be at the receiving end of it. And distressing digital behaviors or posts. These days we also see a lot of gaming addiction happening, a lot of reel scrolling happening. So these are also some of the digital behaviors that can create distress in students. So these signs are the body and mind sending signals that help is required. When we notice such signs, the worst thing we can do is to ignore them. A simple caring conversation that I've noticed that you haven't been yourself lately. Do you want to talk? Can be incredibly powerful. And in my experience of speaking to students, a lot of times they burst into tears just by when I've asked a few of them whom I've seen, not keeping well or not being their usual self. They have broken down into tears that, nobody has asked me if I'm okay. And I think that's a very, very powerful conversation starter for somebody whom you feel is close to you and is distressed right now. Now, preventing suicide through a psychosocial lens. So, a psychosocial lens reminds us that distress does not arise in isolation. We also have to consider that what is the individual's emotional experiences, family relationships, peer influence, academic pressure, institutional environment, all of these. And this is the very popular ecological perspective. Counseling then is not just reducing the symptoms. It is not about diminishing the risk factors. It is about restoring connection. It is also about developing coping mechanisms in within the individual so that they have better coping strategies, because the challenges are not going away. Life is complex and it will get complex in future as well. But what really matters in the counseling scenario is how we help the individual develop adaptive coping mechanisms and making them feel safe and valued in their ecosystem. Now, some of the counseling strategies that can be helpful are building rapport and listening without judgment, accepting the students' feelings without dismissing them, creating a space where they feel safe to express distress. It is very, very important to create a space where students are uninhibited, where they can talk out their mind and heart. Creating a space where asking open-ended questions. So oftentimes we are too busy, everybody is too busy speaking, that there is so less of listening happening. And oftentimes we just give them questions that are a conversation breaker. So showing warmth and respect is very, very important. Then risk assessment, just a second. So, safety planning, cognitive behavioral therapy, strength based approaches where we work with individuals' own strengths to deal with it, risk assessment. Once rapport is established, we need to make a risk assessment that what is the scenario right now. And oftentimes when we feel that suicide ideation is happening, a counselor can also, depending on the kind of assessment they've done, they can also ask questions like, are you thinking of harming yourself? And this question does not increase risk. The counselor usually asks this question when the risk assessment has happened, but this question often opens the door to honest conversations. Assessment includes understanding intent, plan, means, timeline, current coping resources, and the presence or absence of social support. So, after due consideration of all of these factors, it is decided whether the situation is a low risk, moderate risk, or requires immediate action. Uh, then safety planning. Safety planning is one of the most effective tools for preventing suicide. It includes recognizing personal triggers and warning signs. So for every individual, there are a variety of triggers and they can vary individual to individual. So recognizing those triggers, identifying internal coping strategies, my own coping strategies. Do I withdraw or do I give in to the demands? Do I have maladaptive coping strategies when it comes to stress? Or keeping helpline numbers visible and accessible and restricting access to harmful means. Uh, The key is that the safety plan is created together with the counselor and the participant. It empowers the student or the individual and gives them something tangible to hold on to during moments of crisis. So while therapy might be happening or counseling might be happening in a formal system, the individual has to go back to their homes and their places where there can be quite a few times through the day which can be very very vulnerable. So these mechanisms, the safety plan, can help them hold on to something with hope when they are going through that. Then CBT, DBT, and emotional focus techniques. CBT helps us challenge negative and hopeless narratives. It allows students to reframe their thinking. In my previous slides, I mentioned that hopelessness is one of the biggest reasons why students go into despair, that I have nothing nice to look forward to. Excuse me. While that may not be the case, so it allows students to reframe their thinking and recognize that their situation is not permanent and uncontrollable. Things are transient. Realizing that this is the very basic nature of life, that it changes, is something that we do in CBT. And we also try reframing their own maladaptive ways of thinking, their own patterns of thinking that are malfunctional. DBT teaches distress tolerance skills like grounding, paced breathing, self soothing in times of heightened physiological distress when the student might be vulnerable. All of these can be really, really helpful. Emotion focused approaches encourage naming and validating emotions. So I was just mentioning that how our vocabulary for emotions is very restricted. So what exactly am I feeling in this given moment? If I'm able to label that, I can also seek help around it. We also adopt a trauma informed approach, prioritizing safety, choice, empowerment. These techniques help the student understand their emotions, regulate them, and regain control. Strength based approaches. Alongside challenging distress, we also want to highlight strengths. A strength based approach includes identifying the student's unique capacities, highlighting instances where they have coped well in the past, connecting them to their value system, and encouraging help seeking as a sign of strength and not weakness. So, a lot of times, students in schools and in colleges may not approach counselor, may not approach their peers, may not talk about it because they feel that they would be considered very weak by doing so. So that's not the case, and that's what something we focus on while we are in the counseling phase. Now, whom do we work with? We've spoken about parents, we've spoken about teachers, institutions, but peers are their first responders. An adolescent or somebody who's college going spends maximum time with their peers, and they essentially become the first responders to it. So what could be their practical roles, limits, and gatekeeper basics is something that I'm going to discuss here. Peers often notice distress before anybody else does, so they can listen, they can offer emotional support and gently encourage professional help. So I'm grateful that I come from the domain of psychology, and we also have something in our college where students are on the lookout of other students who may be vulnerable, and we've also created some support groups in the college which are very very helpful and have been doing pretty well when it comes to diminishing distress. So, and peers should refrain from not giving advice. Usually, in scenarios like this, a professional help is more sorted. And promise to keep harmful signal secrets. So a lot of times the student may also confide in their peers that I have tried something like this, and the peers can really really uh, you know confide in them saying that I will keep your secrets. That's not something the student should be doing, the friend should be doing. So, and cultural sensitivity is extremely important in India. Factors like family expectations, gender norms, stigma, cultural obligations, and various interplay of these intersectionalities are very very crucial when it comes to responding to somebody who has suicidal ideations or is moving towards them. Uh, Then, why do we need a culturally sensitive suicide prevention approach? Because Indian family dynamics are pretty complex. We still have a lot of places, we have joint family systems where there are multiple roles to fulfill, and these dynamics can be very, very intriguing and complex at the same time. Academic pressure and achievement orientation is greatly celebrated in our culture. There is still a huge stigma around mental health. Depression, anxiety are considered the devil words, and gender norms affects help seeking. So in this, I see that patriarchy is a big, big factor where men find it difficult. Male students find it very, very difficult to talk about their emotions. I've seen this trend, and research has also shown that females still are very, very vocal about their emotional states and well-being, but men find it very difficult to express, regulate, and understand their emotional health. And so all of this increases the need for culturally grounded counseling. Then digital and social media, one of the very big factors, risk and support. It can be a big grace with respect to helplines and support communities, but then a big, big factor in support when it comes to helplines and support groups and communities online. We have plenty of them, but it is also a big risk. Cyberbullying, online harassment, trolling, these have only escalated the scenarios. There was a very popular influencer suicide
Ma'am,
that made marks.
good evening.
Good evening.
Ma'am, I think the slides are not changing.
Uh, what is being reflected right now? Can you please tell me the title of the slide?
So, neurobiological and psychological underpinnings.
Oh, I think there is some issue.
Yeah, now it has changed. When to refer and emergency protocols.
Okay,
That is the slide
okay,
which comes
okay.
up.
So I
Thank you
was
so
talking
much, ma'am.
about, thank you for mentioning that.
No, but you were
Uh,
very clear, and so I didn't want to disturb you in amidst, but I was listening to you very
is
carefully
the
about,
digital and social media slide
yeah, that
visible
is the
right
one
now?
you were talking about right
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
just
showing up.
talking
Yeah,
about. Yeah.
thank
I'm so sorry for the glitch. Yeah. So, the digital world plays a very, very big role in the student mental health today, and cyberbullying, harassment, trolling, exposure to harmful or sensational content, and trying on to newer ideas. Sometimes students also mention how they just want to explore. So, risk-taking behavior is also on a high rise when we see student patterns of behavior. But online spaces, on the same hand, can also provide help. There are a lot of apps meant for it. There are support groups which can lend us support as well. So, a assessment and also helping the client or the student during the counseling services, being aware of these both risk and protective factors becomes very important. And when to refer, and what should be some of the emergency protocols. So immediate referral is necessary. We have a clause of confidentiality, but when do we break that? So if a client comes to me, a student confides in me and says that, I've been planning on to commit suicide, I cannot keep it confidential. Then it doesn't count in at that point of time. So how or and when should a faculty or a peer should recommend somebody for an immediate referral to counseling? If there is an active suicidal ideation, some kind of self harm behavior has been seen, a specific plan or planning, plotting happening. Sometimes, people notice, but they just ignore all of this. Access to means and a very, very clear intent. So, if the risk factors are very high in somebody's life, it makes sense to sort of refer them to professional help at that point of time. Now, referral includes psychiatric evaluation, ethical involvement of the family, and activation of institutional protocols. So, whatever is required, if a student has reached that state, we always need to take in all the stakeholders and go ahead with it. Now, what can we do to create a ecosystem or a campus that is supportive?
it's
Uh,
still again not changing, ma'am.
just a second. I think, is it okay now? Are we on the
Yeah,
creating a support?
yeah,
Okay, I'll
yeah,
not
yeah.
move to the slideshow. I think there's a glitch there. Yeah.
Okay.
So, creating a supportive campus ecosystem, robust counseling units. Government initiative says that in schools we need to have a counselor at all levels, primary, secondary, and pre-primary. But we do see a discrepancy happening in the kind of roles they should be doing versus the kind of roles that they are engaged in. But we need to have counseling units in place so that students can who they do not have to bear the financial pressure of it. It should come as an institutional deliverable. Then we should have peer support groups. Support groups can be very, very helpful. They can be called support clubs. They can also be very, very creative. So colleges, at least in my college, we have a very, very stable and working support group. Mental health awareness initiatives, talking about it is very important. I remember that on the suicide prevention day, we had the drama club creating awareness in various forms. And sometimes just by seeing, people can also introspect that they might be going through the same situation right now, and they might want to seek help. Faculty sensitization is extremely important. I think in the previous session also we were talking about how the recent Delhi suicide case of the 10th grade student, the faculty is being penalized now. But that is a very, very reactive approach. We need to have a preventive approach to it. There is no sensitization. And I think the speaker was very rightly saying that teachers are on the verge of burnout. So when the entire ecosystem is toxic and it's breeding like that, we cannot expect the students to be very healthy and mindful and develop ways that are helpful. Finally, we should also have crisis response teams in colleges, in schools. I think faculties should also have those training workshops where they're told what to do when they see a student in crisis. Panic attacks and all of these issues related to mental health are spreading like a pandemic, and they're very, very frequently seen in campuses. So what can we do? So we need to have our own crisis response ready, and for this we need a lot of sensitization. uh, then how do we do? And the last bit is that we need to support each other. Suicide prevention is a shared responsibility. No one individual can do a lot about it. And I would like to end it by saying that connection is the antidote to despair. uh, when you are connected, when you are amongst people, when you have healthy relationships, and when everybody lifts each other for a better life, that's when we can battle despair, which is the root cause of a lot of psychological distress. Thank you so much. That's from my end. I'm open to any question answers. If anybody wants to
Well,
ask anything.
thank you very much. And it's a wonderful and a scholarly presentation coming up at a right time at the end of the day. We still have quite a few speakers, and uh, I
Thank you
would,
so much, sir. Yeah.
yeah, I would open it to the discussion. If there are questions from our audience, please feel free to come forward and ask.
Thank
It's
you,
a quite
Saroji. Yeah.
important. Yes, go ahead, please.
Anybody wants to ask anything? Yeah, I can share the slides with sir, and maybe he can forward it too. So, how to
Yes, we will
encourage
do that.
students to take counseling? So, one of the things in my experience that I've seen is that stigma plays a very important role in why a student may not want to seek counseling. So, contact is important. Talking about it is very important, and telling that it's absolutely okay. In my personal experience, a lot of times I teach in a girls' college, and the gender intersectionalities of it play a very, very crucial role there. So, girls often come and say that, my family doesn't view it very positively. So, like the previous speaker was mentioning, that we need to talk about it. The more we talk about it, the more normalized it becomes. And when the stigma is detached from something like this, then I think students don't hesitate in taking counseling. The narrative right now, the current discourse and narrative right now is that people who are really mentally ill or sick need help. But what we fail to understand is that counseling really helps you in adapting well to your environment. And everybody is going through psychological distress. Coming from the field of mental health, all of us also feel overwhelmed at a lot of times, and we personally might want to seek help. So when this conversation gets started, I think half the battle is won there. So that's the first way in which we can encourage students. And giving referrals is, of course, a very, very important way. Sometimes they might feel very stuck in whom to approach, who is reliable. So I think any institution can also create an inventory where students can easily access help.
Well, thank you. And it is really very difficult to work in the field of suicidology.
Yeah,
Those who really work, they know what is the burden of care that they feel.
yeah,
And a number of times they develop anxiety, depression, and conflicts, particularly when you lose a client. It's a nightmare for a therapist or a doctor,
absolutely.
whether it is in the hospital or outside the hospital, or when you are working on a helpline, it is far more difficult because not much details are known to you. So it's a very sensitive work. People may not realize, but one of the most sensitive field in the field of mental health is suicidology. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much for coming forward and making this presentation. I highly appreciate your participation to our foundation and this seminar. We'll continue to be in touch with you and seek more opportunities for that.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Yeah,
I would be happy to help. Thank you
yeah.
so much for having me, sir.
Thank you.